Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Michael Grace, and this is episode 10 of the KMG Show. So, you will notice that the format is exactly the same as it's been for the first 2 weeks, and there's a reason why that is the case. I had a long-standing project to do this weekend, which is I review movies every week, and I have been doing that first on a 24-inch monitor without HDMI, and then later on a 32-inch computer monitor. But I had this big screen TV, which was not set up, and I decided it was time to do that. First of all, I had to get a table to put it on, which I got from Staples. Amusing story about that. I use prepaid credit cards, and the system was pretty simple until my bank or credit union decided that they were really going to get into the anti-money laundering campaign. And now it is bewilderingly complex to sign on to use the credit card. And when I went to buy the table from Staples, my credit card was declined, despite the fact that the table cost $50 and I had $200 on the card. And so then I bought something on Amazon, and the credit card was declined. So I called up my bank, and they put me through to Visa, and they told me, well, the problem is that there is no information about your address on the card. And I thought, well, that's not really my fault, is it? Because the sign up for the card, when you register the card, it didn't ask me for my address. And so the woman from Visa took down the address, and I thought, okay. And then I thought badly about the email that I sent to Staples, angry about the fact that they wouldn't let me buy a table, despite the fact that I had a credit card with more than enough money on it. So I ordered again from Staples, and it went through. And then I got an announcement saying that the table that I bought from Amazon was being shipped to me, and that was not good news, because I had assumed that since my credit card had been declined, that the purchase had been canceled. No, apparently not. So I contacted the retailer, it wasn't Amazon.ca directly, and told them to cancel it, and they said, no, it's too late, because it's in the process of being shipped. So outside my door is a thin box containing a table that I have no use for. I did contact Amazon, and they have accepted the return. And if it ever stops raining in Victoria, I will take the table down to the post office and send it back. Now, I have I suppose you could call it an all-in-one amplifier, HDMI amplifier, where everything runs through it. So once I figured it out, once I relearned how to do that, it's pretty simple. All of the components are plugged into HDMI terminals, and the terminal runs directly to the TV. So there's only one cord to the TV instead of a bunch. And I had the thing all set up, and then I remembered the problem with my speakers, which are I bought used about 10 years ago. Pretty much everything that I have is about 10 years old. The TV and all the rest of it is clip speakers, and they have, well, actually the problem's not with speakers, the problem's with the amplifier, because instead of just, stripping some plastic off the speaker wires and then threading that through terminals on the amplifier, you have to thread it through. It uses these bronze or copper prongs. So you have to thread the speaker wire through these prongs, and then attach it with the world's tiniest screw. And then you put these sheaths, these plastic sheaths on them, red for positive, black for negative. And as I was pulling the speaker wire out of a box, you know, that infamous box where everyone keeps their electronic stuff, I saw that one of the prongs had fallen off. And I guess I'd forgotten how agonizing this process was. I had to strip the wire again and then try to get it to thread it through the little hole in the prong. But the real problem was the sheath, that maybe it had become brittle through age. As I say, it's about 10 years old. And I could not get the sheath over the prong, coming from the top or coming up from the bottom. And I guess I hadn't affixed the speaker wire tight enough because it kept coming out. And I spent about 2 hours trying to get this done, sweating more and more and getting more and more angry before I abandoned it. And I thought, but I'm not going to give up. This is not going to defeat me. I don't want to be one of those sad men who pays a stranger $100 to set up their electronics for them. So I went to a hardware store in my neighborhood, a home hardware, and I asked this nice old man if he could help me. And he wrestled with the sheath and was no more successful than me. And while I was doing this, I had an idea that I could simply cut the sheath off and then secure it with some electrical tape. And I asked him where it was, and he showed me, and he suggested, of course, that I should buy red electrical tape rather than black, you know, red for positive. And so that I came home, and I was the next day, and I was wrestling with that. And then eventually I had to, I don't have a screwdriver set. I've been using a butter knife to try and affix the world's tiniest screw to the pole, and that wasn't working very well, and I was in danger of stripping the screw. Eventually I used a little implement that's part of a nail clipper to that, and I had to finally take my contact lenses out because I have no good, very short-term vision doing that. And I finally affixed the screw, put on the tape, put it all together, pushed all the implements against the wall and turned it on, and now it works. And now I'm in a much better position to actually appreciate the movies that I talk about every Thursday. You know, some months ago, I mocked Matt Vey for watching some epic film, I forget which it was, on an iPad, RoboCop, something like that. But I was not in a very different position. So, interesting thing, on the way back, I had gone to Best Buy to buy some HDMI cables. And on the bus back, I was seated next to a woman that I would guess she was about 25 years old. She was a good-looking woman. She had pale skin, and she had long, lovely red hair, curly, but not too curly. But she had all this stuff in her face. She had a black stud in one of her nostrils. She had a white stud in one of her eyebrows. She had 2 steel hoops in her septum. And of course, I've seen all that before. But what she showed me was new to me, that she had something affixed to her philtrum, which is this part of the face, of the upper lip. It was a black disc which covered the entirety of her philtrum, and it looked like a little Hitler mustache. And not for the first time, I wondered why on earth women desecrate their body in this manner. I understand that it's sexual signaling, you know. In other words, I will do it. on the first date. Now, I understand that young people don't date anymore, but so I guess it would be I will do it on the first hookup. But it's also a form of what is known in nature as aposematism, which is the manner in which certain animals and plants disport themselves in order to ward off predators. That, as I've mentioned before, in the past, a man would get to know a woman, go out with a woman, and it would be usually some time before her insanity, if it were there, was manifested, because people tend to be on their best behavior in the early days or weeks of a relationship. But now, with social media and with this aposematism of piercing and tattoos, multicolored hair, one side of your head shaved, that sort of thing. Well, I guess, in a way, it's distressing, because one is always distressed to see people make themselves uglier. But it is a kind of benefit, because, the message is quite clear from the beginning, which is stay away from me if you value your good health. So, oh yes, someone asked on the chat, just as the show was ending on Friday, what did I think of John Huston's film version of Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood? I thought it was quite good. I mean, I don't think it's as good as the novel. I mean, that's a problem. Good novels generally don't make good movies. It's typically, midwit novels like The Godfather that make good movies. But certainly the casting of John Huston's Wise Blood is really good. Is really good indeed. Brad Dourif, and it's got Ned Beatty in it, and others, and I can't complain there. So let's talk about coronavirus, and I have a hypothesis about this. I'd mentioned, I think last week, that after the nuclear winter scare of the 1980s died, after Reagan's successful negotiations with Gorbachev over nuclear weapons, almost immediately we had the climate scare. That, the seas are going to start boiling, any day now. Gordon Brown said more than 5 years ago that we had 5 years to save ourselves, and that 5 years passed, and the seas are still not boiling, and Earth has not turned into Venus. Apparently now we have 11 years. The problem with this is that I suppose 11 years is far enough away that people look around at the weather and say, and of course, remember, weather is not climate. Yes, I can't stress that enough. But people say, come on, if there's going to be apocalypse, hurry up. Where is it? I don't see any evidence of it. And now we have coronavirus. And my hypothesis is that the thing that distinguishes both the nuclear winter scare and the so-called climate emergency scare is the belief that we are wicked and we must be punished. Now, people no longer believe in God. They no longer believe in final judgment. They no longer believe in hell. And so we have to have different sources to fill this void. And so we had nuclear winter, and then we had global warming, which turned out to be climate change, and then climate emergency, climate extinction. It's funny that the more it seems obvious that there isn't going to be anything terrible happening, the more frantic the rhetoric from the Greta Thunbergs of the world becomes. So where is it? Where's this apocalypse? Where's the climate apocalypse? Oh, coronavirus. Yeah. Yeah, that looks like it could be the new Black Plague. So yeah, we can't get enough of this because, as I say, we are wicked, and we need to be punished. And coronavirus, I guess, has the possibility of wiping out a large part of the Earth's population in a relatively short time. So again, I suppose we must start with what's the view from Moloch. And according to CNBC, Dow roars back from coronavirus sell-off with biggest gain since 2009, surges 5.1%. Hooray! So it would appear that I guess what the market has priced in what they believe to be the overall effects of coronavirus, and not so bad. Although Peter Cardillo, chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities, was skeptical the worst was over for the market. I wouldn't put too much into this, he said, noting longer-dated U.S. Treasuries are still trading near record levels as coronavirus fears persist. Although I think we're getting close to putting in a bottom, I think we need to drop another 2 to 3% to have some sort of capitulation. More than 89,000 cases of coronavirus have been confirmed around the world, along with more than 3,000 virus-related deaths. Australia, Thailand, and the U.S. reported over the weekend their first coronavirus-related deaths. Rhode Island was the first U.S. state on the East Coast to report a coronavirus case. Now, anyone who's heard me on live streams knows that my fear is the market is wildly overvalued. I mean, it bears almost no relationship to the actual economy. It's pure speculation, most of it done by bots, that the Dow and the S&P 500 have risen largely because of share buybacks by companies, which is companies abandoning the long-term vision to go for short-term profits for their top employees and their board of directors. Now, the New England Journal of Medicine weighed in on Friday, saying, and this is according to Breitbart, that the coronavirus currently causing panic in world markets could turn out no worse than a severe seasonal influenza in terms of mortality. Citing an analysis of the available data from the outbreak in China, the authors note that there have been almost 0 cases among children younger than 15, and that the fatality rate is 2% at most, and it could be considerably less than 1%. Those who have died have been elderly or were already suffering from another illness, as with ordinary flu. The underlying data suggests that the symptoms varies, and fewer than 1 in 6 of the cases were reported as severe. The vast majority of patients who are diagnosed with this recover, and among those who are hospitalized, the median stay thus far is 12 days. Coronavirus, they note, does spread easily, and the average infected person has infected 2 other people. That means the U.S. should expect the illness to gain a foothold. But they note travel restrictions on China imposed by President Donald Trump over the objection of some critics may have helped slow the spread of the virus. That tends to be my own feeling, especially since there's considerable doubt, it seems to me, as to how many people who have been cited as having coronavirus have actually been tested and proved to have the disease. With regard to climate change hysteria, I mentioned last week a young German woman called Naomi Zeipt, who is called the anti-Greta. And a curious article in the Daily Mail by someone called Ralph R. Ortega begins, the German teenage national who's been dubbed the anti-Greta Thunberg defended her support of a white nationalist, and took aim at climate alarmists in her first appearance at the biggest annual meeting of grassroots conservatives in Maryland on Friday. Naomi Zeipt, 19, when asked if she was still a fan of white nationalist Stefan Molyneux, a Canadian vlogger she called an inspiration, in a YouTube video, answered she still was. I'm still a fan, absolutely, she told a reporter at CPAC. And white nationalist, Zeipt was asked about comments Molyneux made in 2018 in which he praises white nationalism. Sure he did. And claims Poland was, quote, peaceful, free, easy, civilized, and safe, unquote, because it is essentially an all-white country. Zeipt defended the comments in response to the reporter's question, saying they only sound racist when taken out of context. He's not comparing other races, not at all, Zeipt said. He is just describing his experience in Western countries, and I know that to the extent, for example, if I was in a country where Sharia was present, I know I would not be able to speak as freely as in Western countries. It's not that we are better in any way in Western countries. We still have freedom of speech, and I'm very happy that's the case. Well, I have to congratulate this young woman for not bowing to the pressure, for not making the ritual groveling apologies, for not engaging in a struggle session with her enemies, but this isn't going to end. She is going to be hounded about this forever. Now, this fellow who wrote this story, Ortega, is an American, and I have to say, I am not used to this communist formulation, white nationalist, appearing in what Alan Partridge famously dubbed possibly the world's best newspaper, the Daily Mail. But yes, everyone is a white nationalist now, it seems. Interesting fellow called Charles Hugh Smith has a blog post from last Thursday called "Could the COVID-19 Pandemic Collapse the U.S. Healthcare System?" And he talks about, he says this: beyond the possibility that the logistics and costs of care will overwhelm the system, there are numerous and highly consequential second-order effects to consider. As you may recall from recent posts here, first order, every action has a consequence. Second order, every consequence has its own consequence. Second order effects of the pandemic colliding with America's dysfunctional healthcare system include people avoiding care because they can't afford it. 2, potential shortages of medications due to an over-reliance on supply chains in China. Now, I used to write about the mining industry, and I'll make the same observation about drugs as I did about mining. There are certain systems which are critical to national security. Obviously, strategic minerals would be one, but drugs are certainly another. Why on earth, or how on earth, did we allow a situation to evolve whereon we are dependent on China for our drugs? It's just, it's almost unthinkable. He writes that U.S. healthcare's obsession with maximizing profits by any means available has transformed healthcare from a calling to just another burnout job in the corporate America profit-maximizing grinder. A long-time general practitioner recently explained the consequences of this transformation should the pandemic engulf the U.S. The risk of wholesale healthcare failure from a stress even a fraction of what is experienced in China is deeply, deeply underappreciated. The transition of medicine from calling to career is nearly complete, as is the removal of any mentors who might teach otherwise. If Corona hit my community 20 years ago at a time when all the administrators and most of the staff of our 200-bed hospital lived in town, my partners and I would have sucked it up and did our best, even at the risk of our life. I'm not boasting or saying we're heroes. It's just that that was the way we were trained. White coats were only for the broadest shoulders, and you were taught that the risks of taking care of sick people was part of the deal. Our patients were our neighbors. They counted on us. Such respect as we were given was due to the fact that we were their healthcare resource. The leadership and medical staff of the hospital would have done what we could to make it work. And yet here were a number of independent pharmacies and health supplies we could rely on if things got tough. Then a combination of secondary effects and political influence purchased by deep-pocketed competitors put most of the independent clinicians in an untenable place, and all left or were absorbed. Today, though the same organization owns the hospital, none of the management lives in town. Like most health systems, the owners are more interested in data collection and foot traffic than healthcare, and it shows. The inpatient doctors are all hospitalists who live far out of town. All the other docs in town now work for the same organization, but they haven't been welcome in the hospital for years. Few of the nursing staff live nearby. If a real pandemic hits, that hospital will well and truly fail. There's no other word for it. Docs and nurses won't show up. It's not their friends or family or kids' teacher or pastor at risk. While we wouldn't have liked it, we would have risked our health for our community. These professionals are not going to risk their life for a job. The senior management will try to keep it together for the sake of their careers, but the next tier will quickly bag it. Again, it's just a job. The corporate supply chain is so fragile, and there are now so few community resources that the hospital as a care system will quickly break down. Well, as I like to say, quoting E.F. Schumacher, small is beautiful, and scale is our enemy. I don't know, I suppose one of the virtues of the coronavirus outbreak is just highlighting how very bad scale is, and perhaps the coronavirus will result in scaring us straight. But I rather doubt it, for the reason that our God now is Mammon, and if patients are simply units to doctors now, well, it results in bigger profits, and that's the really important thing, isn't it? Okay, so let's talk about Joe-mentum, as they're saying it, and I must issue a apology to Kyle Rowland, who I appeared with on Luke Ford's stream many times. I often ended up shouting at him or him shouting at me, but I found him an amusing and intelligent young man. Anyway, his prediction was that Joe Biden was going to be the Democratic nominee. This was like 3 or 4 months ago. And I responded that Joe Biden is such a clown that I don't know that he would make it to Super Tuesday. Well, it turns out that the Democratic Party has decided that the clown is what they want, because the alternative is Bernie Sanders. And of course, everyone is now pretending that they don't know that Bernie Sanders is a communist. Well, it's not as if he has kept this a secret. He has been in Congress for decades. I'm also reminded by the results of South Carolina, where Biden got an absolute majority, which is astounding. I wonder whether there's ever going to be anything close to a fair election in America again, and that has to do with absentee ballots and what they call vote harvesting. That, that headmen are given absentee ballots and they fill them out for people. We are supposed to believe that, tens of thousands of black people in rural South Carolina used absentee ballots. Yes, okay. Because I suppose a trip to the polls would be too much for them. Vote harvesting is how the Democrats took over the House in the midterms in 2018. And of course, it is the states who determine the voting procedures. And the result of this is that in California, at least, it seems unlikely that the Republicans will survive as a viable party. In fact, in most elections in California now, after the runoff, there are only Democrats on the ballot, a Democrat running against a Democrat, and this is due to vote harvesting, i.e. fraud. Once again, I'll point out that if people are interested in preventing voting fraud, well, there's a way to do it. It's not a new way. It's not high tech. It doesn't require the investment in apps or anything like that, but it does require people to show up in person with photo ID on the voting day and not before and not after, and then the votes are counted on the voting day. This is a system that served the United States well for, I don't know, more than 150 years. But then it was decided, I suppose the deficiency in this system is that it makes fraud a lot harder than it might be. Yes, people will say Kennedy stole the 1960 election via vote fraud in Illinois and Texas, and that's true. But the old adage is that the Republicans believed that they must win races by more than 2%. That was the amount of fraud that was built into the system, typically with pastors being given walking around money, as they say it. I'm just looking at this story from Breitbart. Joe Biden badly bungles Declaration of Independence quote in stump speech. Former Vice President Joe Biden on Monday botched a quote from the Declaration of Independence during a speech in Texas. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women are created by go, you know the thing. I'm not making this up. In the same speech, Biden asked voters to show up big for him on Super Thursday. Sorry. Last week, Joe Biden pledged that if he were to become president, he would appoint the first African-American woman to the Senate. Never mind that wouldn't be a first. I can think of one woman, Carol Moseley Braun from Illinois. She was elected to the Senate from there. But presidents do not appoint senators. This is the remarkable thing about Joe Biden becoming the anti-Bernie. We see that Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar have dropped out of the race and are endorsing Biden. But Joe Biden is a senile buffoon. And it is the nature of senescence or Alzheimer's, if you will, that this doesn't get better. It only gets worse. Assuming that Joe Biden triumphs in a in a convention where there is no clear winner, assuming that Milwaukee isn't burnt to the ground by Bernie bros, how exactly is Joe Biden going to campaign? Because, just put out of your mind all of these polls about how all of the Democratic candidates are outpolling Trump. People don't, this polling is useless because people aren't seriously thinking about voting, who to vote for until they get a nominee. And the Democrats are still nowhere close to getting a nominee. I mean, the old rule is that people only took presidential elections seriously until Labor Day, which is the first Monday in September, which is, almost half a year off. But, oh my God, Joe Biden, what has this guy ever accomplished in his life? Except make up stories about himself. He was talking about he and the U.S. ambassador being arrested in South Africa. Now, I suppose there's the possibility that he believes that this really happened to him, or perhaps he made it up in the same way that he has made up most of his academic accomplishments. Oh, graduated at the top of his class. Well, none of that is true. Oh, and he's always talking about his stupendous IQ. Although certainly his speech does not indicate a man with a particularly high IQ. But he is the anti-Bernie. And I mean, is this guy going to be put in isolation? Is he going to be locked in a box? Are they going to sew his lips shut? Or are they going to come up with some sort of chemical compound for him? Some sort of, amphetamine mix, maybe, an attempt to get those brain cells working harder. I mean, I could talk for quite a long time about Joe Biden being a person who was not very bright and is now senile. But I'm going to move on to an essay written by Ryan Landry, who you might remember from the internet a few years ago, and then he disappeared. But he is now back with a publication that he edits called The American Sun, which I recommend. He wrote an essay before South Carolina called The Democrats' Racial Fissure. He says, observers in our sphere often note the Jenga Tower coalition on the left. It needs the anti-white target to stay on point, which Steve Saylor often calls the KK crazy glue. California and Washington State have shown possible divides, with Asians allying with bad whites to reject affirmative action. There is a new fissure opening for anyone who can see election results and read polls. The far white left is allying with the Hispanic blocs against the Acela crowd and their black voting blocs. Bernie is running away with Hispanics. Biden and Bloomberg are fighting over blacks. Pundits should all be talking about Bloomberg's colossal mistake in not being on the South Carolina ballot and not taking his time in the debates to destroy Biden. Mike Bloomberg was at a black church recently in the last couple of days, and most of the congregation, or a large part of it, turned their backs on him. I mean, literally. I don't know why he thinks that he can buy black support. Tom Steyer made the same mistake. As I tweeted a couple of days ago, the old truths are the best truths. To wit, there's no fool like an old fool, and also a fool and his money are soon parted. Ryan Landry continues, had Bloomberg gone after Biden as a senile has-been with no accomplishments, he likely would have swallowed all of Biden's South Carolina votes and set himself up to sweep through Super Tuesday. Right now, many Super Tuesday states lead Bernie, California, and Texas as big ones, with Florida as a big Biden prize, with Bloomberg chipping at all of Biden's votes in southern states. Now, there was a story which people might have seen. California, richest prize, right? Well, as of last week, Biden's campaign had one office in California, in East LA, which was found to be padlocked at 9 o'clock in the morning. One office in California. Now, how can you be a viable candidate for the Democratic nomination when you have one office in California? Doesn't that suggest that the fix is in at the highest levels, that whatever means necessary will be taken to make sure that the establishment candidate wins? Joe Biden has done very little campaigning in the Super Tuesday states, but apparently you don't need to campaign anymore. You don't need to be compos mentis to be a viable candidate anymore. You just need the support of the elite. Ryan Landry continues, every survey and every statistic in America is just another way to filter race. What did the above paragraph reveal? Bernie has his Sandinistas and Hispanics, while Biden has establishment and supposed moderate white liberals and blacks. Bloomberg is making a play at all of Biden's markets and any potential crossover or independent voters if open primaries are there. These are the coalitions. It's all race. For a moment, let's laugh at moderate white Democrats who support gun confiscation, open borders, and hormone blockers for children. Those are the moderates. This is just high and low coalitions forming. Bernie does have pundit and some institutional support. This is not Trump 2016, where he had virtually no one to staff anything. Bernie has some competent operators and a new low in the way of Hispanic voting blocs. This is the future for the Democrats, and he has snatched it first for them. This might explain his pivot from anti-immigration to totally wide open borders. The other high-low of the establishment and blacks was, in fact, the upstart coalition a generation ago in the 70s that destroyed the old Democrat coalition of the eggheads, unions, and Southerners. Southerners were the swing in America then. This is real and now. Super Tuesday could end with Bernie holding lots of delegates and a very diverse map of wins with a couple of big ones, while Biden is sitting there with South Carolina and southern states. Yes, and Landry concludes, this is the faulty logic that gave John Kerry the nomination in 2004, that faulty logic being winning in states, winning primary states that he doesn't have a chance in the general election in November. Kerry won the nomination in 2004 before the party could jump in and stop the madness spawned by one Howard Dean scream. This is fun to watch. The friction should provide sparks as candidates carry on into March. Already on television, pundits are being removed, pundits bark at one another, and quite a bit of mud gets thrown. Enjoy it while it lasts. I'm certainly going to enjoy it. I mean, it looks like we might be cheated once again of the prospect of an open convention. You know, you hear this all the time. Oh, this year is going to be different. And I thought this year, well, maybe it could be different. But, you know, if the establishment really wants Senate Joe Biden to win that badly, I don't know that there's anything that Bernie could do about it, especially since Bernie is such a weak candidate that any woman can jump up on his stage and seize his microphone, and then he looks flustered, and then he walks to the side of the stage, and he just looks sad with his head bent down. As I say, not a strong character. But I suppose you're all asking, what does Flavor Flav have to say about all this? Well, according to The Guardian, Public Enemy fire Flavor Flav after clash over Bernie Sanders rally. You know, who's Flavor Flav? He's this moron who was in the rap group Public Enemy, and I suppose you could say he was the American version of Bez from the Happy Mondays, or Bez was the English version of Flavor Flav. That's certainly how Jeremy explained it on Peep Show. The spat brings one of rap's longest partnerships to an end as Chuck D, that's the fellow who's the brains behind Public Enemy, says his former bandmate is motivated by money and better find rehab. A statement from the group said that they would be moving forward without Flavor Flav. We thank him for his years of service and wish him well. His years of service being wearing a sideways baseball cap, lurid sunglasses, and wearing a ridiculous clock as big as his chest on his chest. Chuck D, the group co-founder and core member, added on Twitter that he has been sued by Flav's lawyer on Friday, so now he stays home and better find rehab. The rally performance took place on Sunday with core member Chuck D performing as Public Enemy Radio. Following the announcement of the show last week, lawyers for Flavor Flav said the rapper has not endorsed any political candidate in this election cycle, adding that Sanders was not authorized to use the group's image without Flav's permission. While Chuck is certainly free to express his political view as he sees fit, his voice alone does not speak for Public Enemy. Flav appended the letter with a handwritten note reading, "Hey Bernie, don't do this." In the wake of the legal letter, but before his dismissal, Chuck D had said Flavor chooses to dance for his money and not do benevolent work like this. He has a year to get his act together and get himself straight, or he's out. Following the dismissal, Chuck D argued that Flav's decision was about money rather than politics. My last straw was long ago, he wrote on Twitter. It's not about Bernie with Flav. He doesn't know the difference between Barry Sanders or Bernie Sanders. Sick burn. So I don't attack Flav on what he doesn't know. If there was a money bag, Flav would have been there front and center. He will not do free benefit shows. He complained of a lack of support from Flav for an earlier fundraiser by Harry Belafonte for the social justice organization Sankova, calling Flav ungrateful and accusing him of judging a bikini contest instead. I suppose, this really puts into perspective the state of rap music, that here we are discussing a rap group that hasn't been popular for, 20 years? I mean, Public Enemy made an enormous impression, but they were political, and rap music isn't political anymore. It's all about my dick and my Glock and my back and bitches, and I had this bitch before you had this bitch, and such like. So that I suppose that Chuck D, especially now with his support of Bernie Sanders, he's not au courant with the culture anymore. That he's an old man now, and he's concerned with old man topics, such as who would make the best president of the United States. I wanted to say something about Pete Buttigieg, who has left the race for president, and he's supporting Senator Joe Biden. It's a story from 6 days ago. 9-year-old Buttigieg supporter asked candidate to help tell the world I'm gay. This is at a campaign rally in Denver. Zachary Rowe was called on stage so Buttigieg could answer directly a question the young fan had written to the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, as he entered the rally. In front of about 4,000 people, Zachary shook Buttigieg's hand and gave him a handmade bracelet. Zachary asked, "Thank you for being so brave. Would you help me tell the world I'm gay too? I want to be brave like you." Zachary, Buttigieg said, did not seem to need a lot of advice from me on bravery. You seem pretty strong to me. It took me a long time to figure out how to tell even my best friend that I was gay, Buttigieg said, let alone to go out there and tell the world, and to see you willing to come to terms with who you are in a room full of 1,000 people, thousands of people you've never met. That's really something. Buttigieg also told Zachary a couple of things that might be useful. The first thing is that it won't always be easy, but that's okay, because you know who you are. And that's really important, because when you know who you are, you have a center of gravity that can hold you together when all kinds of chaos is happening around you. You never know who's taking their lead from you, who's watching you and deciding that they can be a little braver because you have been brave. The crowd cheered and someone yelled, "Go, Zach." Now, this is obviously, a setup, but, I hear that there's something called the conservative movement, which is supposed to be important, and this is the real right wing. These are our betters, and, they tell us, what's acceptable and what's not. Donald Trump, according to the conservatives, the real conservatives, the true conservatives, is not acceptable. 9-year-old gay boy, there's no such thing as a 9-year-old gay boy. This is, if this incident was not sufficient to cause these so-called conservatives to holster up their guns, I'm going to swear here, then what fucking good are they? What? It is now acceptable for a presidential candidate to groom children in public? That's where we are now? Let's see. The two, that is 9-year-old Zachary and 38-year-old Buttigieg, were then joined on stage by Buttigieg's husband, Chasen, who greeted Zachary and then walked him off while people in the audience chanted, "Love means love." As I pointed out before, this is a universal injunction. People who say that love means love cannot logically be against polygamy, incest, bestiality, polyamory, whatever. If love means love, then it is all the same. I mean, if, and words are important and ideas have consequences, as Richard Weaver said. If they wanted to say that gay is good, well, yeah, that's one thing. But to say love is love, that is not the same thing at all. Again, it is a universal injunction. So let's go to the chat. Ricky Bullock says, maybe the kid was already molested. Well, I'm not going to speculate, but certainly one does not expect 9-year-olds to put themselves forward for the whole world to know that they are, quote, gay, unquote. Octopus Knight says bullies were right, I guess. And I spoke about this last week. Yeah, yeah, I certainly believe that. Seriously, what is the profile of the average butt judge supporter? I don't know. They work for the government. That's what I'm. Jonathan Paul asks, who can afford more than one wife? Well, I suppose this works in poor countries. Or I suppose these Mormons who are still polygamous, I don't think that their standard of life is all that high. Ronald Reagan did not want him inside of the U.S. Congress. Who are they talking about there? Are they talking about Mitt Romney? Why isn't Seek and Destroy 99 says, why isn't anyone asking why a 9-year-old is thinking about sex? I don't know that this Zachary Rowe, curious name, R-O, is actually thinking about sex. I don't think that he has any idea what is involved in male homosexuality. I suspect that this is that he's been put up to this by his mother, just as these gay trans kids that we hear about, they've been put up to this by their mothers. And yeah, remember that saying, you know, what it'd be like if women ran the world? Well, they do, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I want some Biden-related topic. The media, is the media in the tank for Joe Biden? Well, I'd say they are. Because let's look at his crackhead, incestuous son, Hunter Biden. The media deciding to make excuses for this shambling wreck of a human being. And here's a profile in the New York Times by Adam Popescu. Hunter Biden apparently is an artist. Ooh, classy. I say classy because, of course, Hunter Biden, I don't want to go into the distressing, disgusting details, but Hunter Biden is the man who put ass in class. There's a new artist in town. The name is Biden. Hunter Biden, his name forever linked to President Trump's impeachment, says painting is literally keeping me sane after years of addiction and poor choices. Dressed in Oxford boots, jeans, and a long-sleeve t-shirt, Hunter Biden ushered a reporter down a stone walkway into a pool house turned art studio in the Hollywood Hills. It was filled with colorful works of decorative abstraction, psychedelic florals, and ethereal patterns that looked like nature viewed through a microscope, leaning toward the surreal. There were nearly 100 of them, all by his own hand. Some were signed R.H. Biden for Robert Hunter Biden, the 50-year-old son of the former vice president. What do you see? He asked, shifting bottles of ink and a bamboo wok brush. The more critical question might be, how does it look to the outside world? For an unknown artist, his name is very well known for all the wrong reasons. President Trump's request for foreign help to investigate Biden's role with the Ukrainian gas company Burisma set the president's impeachment in motion. Oh, really? That's not true. That is a gross factual error. The Democrats and the media were talking about impeachment even before Trump was inaugurated as president. And why? Because of Putin. Because Trump was Putin's puppet, supposedly. And then when Trump actually does get impeached, the articles of impeachment have nothing to do with Russia. So here is the New York Times caught out in a bald-faced lie in support of Biden and the Democratic Party. Republicans, the New York Times continues, continue to press for a separate investigation into Biden's work for Burisma. Democrats worry that his curious overseas dealings, yeah, that's one way to describe corruption, curious overseas dealings, could pose a threat to his father's presidential campaign should he rally back to frontrunner status in the March primaries. Well, how about that? It's almost as if the New York Times knew what was going to happen in advance. And it's almost as if, and this is not my thought, this is not original to me, that the only reason that Joe Biden was anointed the front runner was because of Ukraine, to protect the Democratic Party and to protect the various fraudsters involved in the Ukraine, which is the world's capital of corruption and fraud. Hunter Biden was not certain what the world might say of his new pursuit, but he maintained he was serious. He said he had made a lot of mistakes in his life. He has spoken openly about his history of drug addiction, but becoming an artist, he said, wasn't an impulsive decision. Painting is literally keeping me sane, he said. For years, I wouldn't call myself an artist. Now I feel comfortable doing it. As an undiscovered artist, he is better situated than most, living in a rented 2,000 square foot house in the Hollywood Hills off Mulholland Drive with a Porsche Panamera in the driveway, plenty of natural light, and a pool house he has transformed into an art studio. From the edge of the sloping property, it was leased for $12,000 a month, starting last June 15th, according to the homeowner. He has a view onto the San Fernando Valley below, Burbank and Universal Studios to the east, the 405 freeway to the west. See that red barn? He pointed at a farmhouse perched on the next mountaintop. It belongs to the artist David Hockney, he said, then focused on 4 red-tailed hawks rising on pockets of hot air, a technique called thermal soaring. Look at that, he said, craning his neck. I see them every day. I love watching them. I love how the New York Times manages to compare Hunter Biden to David Hockney, who is a real artist. But so the rehabilitation of Hunter Biden is well underway. And, oh, yes, let's hear about Hunter Biden's wife, his second wife. He had a divorce from his first wife, which was very, very nasty. Indeed, his fingers and forearms were paint-stained, blacks and reds deep under his nails, flecks on his jeans and boots, something his wife, Melissa Cohen, whom he married in May after a week-long courtship, can't stand. I always get my pants dirty, he said. I don't even notice it, but Melissa hates it. Ms. Cohen, who is pregnant with the couple's first child, is a South African-born filmmaker. Oh, really? You want to name any of her films? I suppose anyone can call herself a filmmaker in the same way that anyone can call himself an artist. In any event, she is a South African-born filmmaker in her early 30s who lived in Israel for several years. The day after their first date, Biden tattooed the Hebrew word shalom for peace on his left bicep, giving the couple matching tattoos. Ah. He also has a tattoo of New York's Finger Lakes region on his back because his mother grew up there. No, I'm going to suggest he has a tattoo of New York's Finger Lakes region on his back because he is a crackhead. It's very abstract, sometimes very dark, Ms. Cohen said of her husband's art. It draws a lot from nature. The New York Times doesn't mention that Hunter married Melissa 10 days after meeting her, which is something that normal people do all the time, especially when you are a political liability to your father. And I believe the story mentions a child, an unwanted child that there is a lawsuit over. And it doesn't mention that the woman that Hunter Biden impregnated and then later gave birth to his natural child was a stripper. And that's how he met her. This is just all too good. Seriously, is there ever been a political cycle as amusing as 2020? That we have a senile buffoon who now appears likely to be the Democratic nominee, and he has a crackhead, incestuous son. Of course, oh yes, have you met my wife? Wife? I didn't even know you were dating anyone. Oh, I met her 10 days ago and we got married. Ooh, shotgun marriage, was it? Because that's clearly what it was, that the word was put out to Hunter Biden that he better find himself a wife post haste. I don't know any. How would that? We'll find you a woman. Okay, we have connections, deep connections, all over the world. Okay, about this world. Do women run the world? I would suggest that they do. They certainly run the media, or that is to say that female sensibilities now are responsible for the tone and the content of what is considered news. It's a story from the Daily Mail. The Queen has seen many things in her 68-year reign, but she will never have witnessed anything like this. I can reveal that a 3-year-old boy will be the best man at the wedding of her granddaughter, Princess Beatrice. Bia's fiancé, Eduardo Mapelli Mozzi, has asked his son Christopher, who is known as Wolfie, to do the honors when they tie the knot at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace in May. You can ask a 3-year-old to do anything, and a 3-year-old will pretty much always say yes. A 3-year-old has no idea what a marriage is, what marriage means, what being a best man is. Yeah, I can confirm that Wolfie will be best man. A spokesman for the couple tells me. Not only will he have to hand his father the wedding rings in front of the Queen and other members of the royal family, but he will play an important role at the reception. Surely he won't be expected to make a speech at Buckingham Palace as the shocked courtier when I break the news to them. Wolfie will be the youngest person to have performed a role at a royal wedding throughout the course of British history. A friend of Bia and Edo says they have asked Wolfie to carry out the role because they want to show that he is loved and embraced by his stepmother. Wolfie's mother, the American architect Dara Huang, 37, is expected to be invited to the wedding and reception, which will take place in the gardens of Buckingham Palace, as I revealed earlier this month. Edo is a property developer who is the son of Count Alessandro Mapelli Mozzi, former British Olympian and member of an Italian noble family. Okay, so here's the situation. You have this rich property developer who's married with a child, and he dumps his wife for a big-eyed Bia. And someone, and I'm assuming that it's Beatrice, thought that it would be ultra cute to have a 3-year-old as a best man at her wedding at the Chapel Royal in Buckingham Palace. Weddings are just a joke now. They have no great grave meaning, and it's just an opportunity to show off. That's all it is. Now, of course, Princess Beatrice has been linked to Jeffrey Epstein, and one would have thought that Beatrice is clearly not a very bright woman, that it would have been put to her by someone at the palace that we want this, this whole wedding to be on the down low. Okay, here you are marrying a divorced man with a child, and in the light of everything that's going on, especially with your father, we just want the minimum amount of publicity for this. But of course, as we learn, as we've discovered in recent decades, that women can't get enough of marriages. They just can't get enough of the spectacle and the expense. And so Beatrice has decided, no, there's going to be maximum publicity according to this wedding, because women run the world. Here's another example, another story from the Daily Mail. Ashley Graham reveals she had to change her baby son's dirty diaper in the middle of a Staples office store. Who is Ashley Graham, you might ask? She is what is called a plus size, that is to say fat, model. And the fashion industry has decided that traditional standards of beauty must be eliminated. That, let's take a woman who's 50 pounds overweight, say, and we'll make her a top model. We'll take a woman who has a disfiguring skin disease, vitiligo, and we'll make her a top model. We have transgender models. We have disabled models now. I suppose most of the models now, or the runway models, are 15-year-old girls who look like coat racks. They do not really resemble. They seem completely asexual, which I suppose is to be expected because the fashion industry is run by leathery women and feathery men. The Daily Mail story reads, "She has been candid about the not-so-glamorous side of motherhood, and Ashley Graham revealed she was forced to change her 5-year-old son Isaac's diaper in the middle of a Staples office store on Friday." Taking to Instagram, for those of you who don't know, Instagram is a social media platform where women demonstrate their insanity. The 32-year-old plus-size model revealed she had to change her son in the aisles after struggling to find a bathroom. And here's the Instagram post: "Shit just got real. First diaper blow up while running errands with no restroom in sight. Thank God I remembered to put the changing mat in a diaper bag." And there is a photograph, obviously not taken by her. So this was set up. This story was set up with her squatting and literally wiping excrement from her baby's bottom. And, and Ashley is revealing her enormous ass. Look, she wasn't forced to change the baby's diaper in a Staples. And I suppose people who patronize Staples might be interested. Is it your policy to allow diaper changing to happen on the floor, the aisles in your store? Because that does not sound very hygienic. Is the idea that Staples is now like San Francisco? Are they trying to get that sort of vibe? Ashley had someone else snap the photo of her in the pen aisle as she cleaned up little Isaac on the floor while another customer gazed on from the end of the aisle. I have changed literally thousands of diapers in my life, starting when I was a child. I had 5 younger brothers and sisters, and then as an adult, I have 3 children of my own. It would never have occurred to me to boast about changing diapers, let alone have a picture taken of me changing a diaper or cleaning a befouled child and then publishing that to the entire world. I'm reminded that Jerry Della Femina, who was a legendary ad man in the 1960s and 70s, he wrote a memoir called "From Those Wonderful Folks Who Brought You Pearl Harbor." The joke is that was what he suggested to Panasonic when they first started advertising in the United States. And he describes in that book that, I forget the company, but came to him and said they wanted to advertise feminine hygiene products on television. And Della Femina argued against this, saying that it's going to hurt you because people do not want that sort of stuff on TV. They don't like to talk about it. And then he admitted that he was wrong because research had indicated that while men are squeamish about this sort of thing, women simply can't get enough of it. So let's see. The Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue cover model. Yes, that's the kind of woman that they put on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue now. She was dressed casually for her outing in a black sweater and gray and black patterned leggings with white Nike trainers. So there's a bunch of Instagram pictures from her, and here she is pumping one of her massive breasts. And the caption is, "Pump, but make it fashion." And another one, different pose, saying, "Pump, but make it fashion." Breastfeeding, there's first pump in an Uber, ever so slightly awkward. Apparently, it's not that awkward because 1, a photograph was taken of it, and 2, it was published to the entire world. And here's a picture of her naked from the groin up, with her covering her massive breasts with one of her arms, and we get to see all of her stretch marks. And there's a picture of her breastfeeding her baby with her husband of nearly 10 years, Justin Irvin, who is a black fella, and he is cradling the baby's head. Breastfeeding is literally a sexual act. And our tradition has been, until fairly recently, that sexual acts take place in private. In the same way that voiding one's body of urine and feces, these things are done in private. But women who run the world now, they don't seem to have much of a problem with the complete loss of everyone's privacy. That I'm going to tell you everything about my own life in excruciating detail. I don't know you, but I'm going to tell the world all about my own life in excruciating detail, and I encourage you to do the same, because that's the world that we live in now. I was talking about politics as entertainment. Well, now we have a feud between Ted Cruz and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is really too funny that AOC decided to attack the Trump administration and particularly Mike Pence because of science. And I guess AOC thought that he was simply not appropriate because he's not a scientist, and so AOC decided to here she is retweeting a video, how to wash your hands. I mean, isn't immigration great? Apparently, we need instructions on how to wash hands. Now, this reminds me that I mentioned that I worked at the University of British Columbia for 12 years. And the last time I visited it was about 5 years ago. And I went into the washroom of the Student Union building. And there were instructions using symbols on how people wash their hands. Because the assumption is that a large proportion of the student body at UBC either typically did not wash their hands or did not know how to wash their hands. And of course, these are exactly the sort of people that one wants to bring to one's country. So AOC said, Senator Cruz, well, I understand you judge people's intelligence by the lowest income they've had. I hold awards from MIT Lincoln Lab and others for accomplishments in microbiology. Second, I'm surprised you're asking about chromosomes, given that you don't even believe in evolution. That doesn't have anything to do with it. Cruz had tweeted to her, as you are speaking as the oracle of science, tell us, what exactly is a Y chromosome? And then AOC decided that and she posted a picture of her in front of some sort of project, science fair project, and she has a gold medal pinned to her lapel. And she signs this sincerely, an Intel Global finalist, a former multi-year intern for Senator Kennedy, a cum laude dual major in economics and international relations, a former educational director for national organization, who to you is just a bartender, and also your colleague. So a woman who's boasting about her achievements in high school. It's too funny. Attention must be paid. Why? Because I won a high school science fair. Also, she interned for Senator Kennedy. I'd like to hear a lot more about that story because I suspect that there's quite a few embarrassing incidents involved. I suppose my favorite story about Ted Kennedy. A Chappaquiddick, that's just horrible and disgusting. He condemned, a young woman who he was sleeping with to die. She didn't drown. She died of loss of oxygen trapped in a car. And Ted just decided that, I don't know, if he just forgot about it, nothing bad would happen to the girl or to him. No, but my favorite story about Ted Kennedy was he went on a fact-finding mission to Alaska, I believe, in 1970, when the Senate was taking up the question of whether to approve a pipeline there. And on the flight back from Anchorage, Ted got loaded and was observed charging up and down the aisles, chanting, "Eskimo power, Eskimo power, Eskimo power." Ted Kennedy. I don't think we'll see his like again. But no, if you have to delve into your high school accomplishments in order to prove your intelligence, what you are demonstrating is that people do not believe you to be intelligent. And what a transformation for Ted Cruz. I mean, you remember 2016 when he was running as the uber wonk against Trump? My Constitution and my free enterprise. And then he almost gets beaten, in his Senate race by this Irish clown pretending to be Mexican. But Trump said famously in the dark days of 2016 that about the Republicans, "I will teach you how to win." And, it's working. It is working. Let's see. Let's look at the chat here. What about lessons in wiping oneself? Ugh. What are you going to get into Jordan Peterson territory here? Yeah. Thousands of diapers sitting in every single shortstop. Really, the nerve. Again, I don't want to patronize a store where, I need to buy a notebook, and I'll go, what aisle? Oh, there's the aisle, and I shouldn't have left home today. Let's see. John Miller says, I think the media makes the mistake of conflating Southern black votes with black votes in general. I think there's something in that. Biden got 48.4% of the South Carolina primary vote. It was mostly blacks, over 40. Blacks were supposed to be 60 to 70% of the Democratic support in South Carolina. It's been downhill for Sports Illustrated since Kathy Ireland, who was the high water mark. Kathy Ireland, a very attractive woman, indeed, no question about it. Kathy Ireland is not, I suppose you'd say, conventionally beautiful, but she was a perfect choice. As a catalog model and a Sports Illustrated cover model for that very reason. That beauty is, female beauty especially, is in a way unapproachable. That men are frightened of beautiful women because they seem, it's not as if you could go up to them and just start chatting. At least that's the way that most men think. Whereas someone like Kathy Ireland just seems to be a really friendly, normal person. And of course, I'm reminded that of Marilyn Monroe. Someone mentioned Marilyn Monroe in the chat. That actress, that sometimes actress who became famous for wearing a ripped Gianni Versace dress, said, this is an actual quote, "If I were as fat as Marilyn Monroe, I'd kill myself." And I don't think that most men would consider Marilyn Monroe to have been fat, but you see, the fashion industry is absolutely obsessed with thinness, and the movie industry is obsessed with thinness as well. I think of that actress Jennifer Connelly when she was in her 20s. She was the most beautiful woman in the world, and clearly, she was told that she weighed too much, And so she lost weight, and I guess she won an Oscar, but ever since that time, she is, she's looked starved and unhappy. And Kathy Ireland certainly never looked starved, and she didn't look unhappy. But what are we going to talk about now? Oh, yes, Christopher Hitchens. Not Christopher Hitchens, Peter Hitchens, his brother. Hitchens uncovered a scandal, which has not got very much attention in the media. And he has a column in the Mail on Sunday, and he's been hammering on about Syria, in particular the use of poison gas in Syria. That we were told that President Assad the Butcher, used poison gas on his own people, and pictures and video were provided, and it would appear that these were, as they say, crisis actors. We saw crisis actors, over the weekend, where the same woman wearing a pink hood was seen all around the world. Seen in Canada, seen everywhere, and something to do with coronavirus. I mean, the media is just shameless in this. But anyway, so Hitchens writes how authority tried to ignore and then bury honest dissent by responsible scientists. That the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, two inspectors, discovered that President Assad did not use poison gas on his own people. And this is embarrassing, I suppose, to the British because they bombed Syria as a result of this, and to the Americans. President Trump bombed Syria, but I don't know, Trump let them know in advance, and I think he blew up a shed or something. But this is all in support of Al-Qaeda. The moderates in Syria, the people that we have to get behind to replace the wicked Assad. These moderates are Al-Qaeda. That's right. The same people who blew up the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Yeah, that's who we are supporting. That is to say, our governments are supporting in Syria. Now, it never made any sense that Assad, who is on the verge of winning his war against the insurgents, would use poison gas, because Assad is not crazy. Assad is clearly a skillful politician, like his father was. One does not get to rule a country in the Middle East or the Near East, while being a fool. I mean, it's completely possible that Joe Biden might become, God forbid, president of the United States. But, even, let's see, in the West, there's no responsibility attached to failure. You can be as competent as you want, and then you leave office, like Obama. And, oh, yeah, that Obama, remember him? Oh, yeah, he was the first black president or something. But politics is a far more serious business in the Middle East, in the Near East, because of violence, because of the possibility of being removed from office with a bullet in the head. I suppose sometimes you get to flee to Saudi Arabia. Not that Saudi Arabia would take in Assad, given his religion and his tolerance of Christianity. I'm persuaded that this is the real reason that the Western elite has such a hard-on to remove Assad from office, is because of his toleration of Christianity. The Western elite is committed to the removal of all Christians from that part of the world from whence Christianity sprang. That's what it comes down to. You'll notice that in any dispute between Christians and Muslims, that the elite, and typically the governments of the world, take the side of the Muslims. They have a death wish, and they're determined to drag us off with them. Now, Turkey, of course, has invaded Greece again. This is what, oh, yes, we're going to release migrants. What's going on here is an invasion. There's no other way to describe it. 30,000 people, supposedly. Use of tear gas, reports that one of these people was shot to death, reports of which have been denied. And most infuriatingly, we have evidence of crisis actors. Oh, look, here's a bunch of babies crying on the border because of the evil Greeks won't let us in. And then, unfortunately, you could see the film crew rush into the shot to arrange the babies, for maximum weepies among Western women. This is how we got the Syrian migrant crisis in the first place. That these horrible pictures of dead children, particularly a Kurdish child who was named Alan for some reason. That wasn't his name. His name was Aylan, but he was called Alan because Alan is a Western name. It's a name we know and recognize. And the story was disgusting. That this man's father, he killed his family. He killed his wife and his children by paying for them to be put in an overcrowded, unseaworthy vessel, which resulted in the deaths of everyone except him, strangely enough. Now, if I had been responsible for a disaster like that, and I suspect this is true of anyone listening to this stream, if you had been responsible for a disaster like that, killing your whole family because of your greed and irresponsibility, you'd probably want to keep stum about it. You'd probably want to retreat to the shadows instead of publicizing this to the entire world. But it worked. It worked. And that's how we got the Syrian migrant crisis in 2015. That if you don't agree with your country being overrun by hostile Sunni Muslims, then that means you're in favor of killing babies. Now, we don't have any problem with killing babies here in the West. We call it abortion, and it's worshipped as a religious right by the Liberal Party in Canada and the Democratic Party in the United States. It's the sort of thing that one makes a TikTok video about. I'm using TikTok video. By the way, I'm not making that up. I mentioned earlier that I used to write about the mining business, and one of the companies that I had occasion to write about was a Canadian company called Nevson, who discovered, developed, and owned, I think it was a 3-to-1 split, 75 to 25% split with the host government, the Bisha mine in Eritrea. There was a complaint. There's compulsory national service in Eritrea, and there was a complaint that, in fact, slave labor had been used in the construction of the mine. Now, the company had this investigated. They brought in independent investigators. I believe that there were 3 such, which absolved the company of any blame in this, or said that the slave labor was not used. But the Human Rights Watch has pushed this case, and it ended up, strangely enough, in the Supreme Court of Canada. And I say strangely enough because how on earth would a Canadian court have the jurisdiction to determine whether human rights were being abrogated in Eritrea? Secondly, there is no jurisdiction because the case is moot, because Nevson Resources no longer exists. 2 years ago, it was bought by a Chinese company called Dijin. Now, I suspect it was bought by a Chinese company for this reason. I had noted when, I've written about other companies. Sunridge is another company that was involved in Eritrea. And the United States, the States Department, hates Eritrea. I suspect that the United States Department wishes that Eritrea were not a country, and was absorbed back into Ethiopia, from whence it separated. There was a long, bitter, bloody war fought between Ethiopia and the Eritrean independence seekers. The latter won. And of course, Ethiopia was once a Soviet client, and now it is an American client. And oh, horrible Eritrea. Oh, all the horrible things that happened there. Oh, strangely enough, one doesn't hear those kind of accusations made against China, which is the worst country in the world. And as I mentioned last week, has taken Orwell's 1984 as an instruction manual and has used the latest technology to perfect Orwell's nightmare. Let's see, this is from the Toronto Star. A human rights lawsuit against a Canadian mining company can be heard in British Columbia, even though it involves events in Africa. The Supreme Court of Canada says in a potentially path-breaking decision, and that's the only kind of decision that the Supreme Court of Canada makes. Yeah, there's no law against this, or there's no law for this. Well, we'll write one. We'll read this into the Constitution. The High Court ruled Friday against BC-based Nevson Resources, which doesn't exist any longer, which had argued the claim should not proceed because a Canadian court could not decide the legality of acts by foreign states. Just so. 3 refugees from Eritrea alleged they were forced to work at a gold, copper, and zinc mine operated by the Bisha Mining Share Company controlled by Nevson. Of course, it isn't anymore. It's owned by a Chinese company. Why isn't the Toronto Star telling us this? They contend construction of the mine flouted international legal provisions against forced labor, slavery, and torture, accusations that have not been tested in court. The lawsuit claims a company hired by Bisha Mining made arrangements with 2 such firms of slave laborers to provide workers who worked long days in harsh and dangerous conditions for years. Okay, so how does this work? How does this work? Well, let's let Justice Rosalie Abella tell us. Justice Rosalie Abella was, before her anointment to the critarchy that rules Canada, she was a human rights pest, and she is the person who gave Canada affirmative action, mandatory government affirmative action. And it was a so-called conservative Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, who instituted that. Brian Mulroney also instituted so-called family reunification as the highest priority of our immigration policy. You know, I rail against Lester Pearson and Pierre Trudeau regularly, but sometimes I think that Brian Mulroney was the worst of them all. So, Rosalie Abella wrote, Nevson is a company bound by Canadian law. It is not plain and obvious to me that the Eritrean workers' claims against Nevson based on breaches of customary international law cannot succeed. Those claims should therefore be allowed to proceed. Abella characterized the international human rights law as a phoenix that rose from the ashes of the Second World War, saying the norms at the heart of the case were not meant to be theoretical aspirations or legal luxuries, but moral imperatives and legal necessities. Conduct that undermined the norms was to be identified and addressed. Oh, international law, ha, ha, ha. So, in 1999, during the War of Clinton's Pants, NATO decided to go to war with Serbia because Serbia was being mean to its Muslims who wanted to carry off one of the provinces, Kosovo, which the Serbs considered to be the heart of their nation. According to American Lieutenant General, an American Lieutenant General, quoted in the Washington Post, NATO was engaged in the terror bombing of Serb civilians, which according to, quote, customary international law is a war crime. But I have yet to see Bill Clinton or Tony Blair or Jean Chrétien on trial at the International Court at The Hague. Golly, I wonder why that might be. Could it be that international law is simply a euphemism for Macht ist Recht, might makes right? I think that it is. So, in other Canadian news, yes, as I like to call it, Greetings from Soviet Kazakhstan. Someone called Leslie Lowe, Leslie spelt with a Z, writes, I embrace the healthy fear that I am racist. Oh, no. Hello, my name is Leslie, and I am racist. Am I out burning crosses and refusing to sit in restaurants beside Asian people for fear of coronavirus? No, but I am white, and I live in a society that privileges whiteness. In Halifax, data show that African Nova Scotians are 6 times more likely to be street checked by police than white people. Golly, I wonder why that might be. Across the country, Indigenous adults make up 5% of the population and almost 30% of those incarcerated on federal sentences. Provincially, there are too few Black and Indigenous lawyers and teachers and politicians, maybe because they don't want to do that, you know? You go to the drugstore down the street to buy Band-Aids. You can choose Paw Patrol. You can choose SpongeBob. Or you can have the pinky beige that matches me. That's what counts as flesh-colored, as neutral. As if you think clear bandages are doing the trick, you're missing the point entirely. Bandage privilege. Yeah. This is, I told you that women run the world. Yeah, they do. We talk about period poverty now. That's a thing. And we talk about bandage privilege. These situations, the big and small, are not random. They are systemic. And whether I like it or not, as a white person, I benefit from that structure. I guess you benefit from that structure in that you are paid to moan about this in the Halifax Chronicle Herald. If you were saying it's okay to be white, I don't think that the Chronicle Herald would pay you to write that. Oh, back to the Band-Aids. Band-Aids match my skin. I don't worry about being racially profiled while I'm shopping. My kids don't come home and tell me stories that my Black friends' kids tell them. The way I figure, racists don't sit around worrying about how racist they are. Most of them haven't a sweet clue that their everyday actions or words are causing harm. Yeah, I just wonder if one were to look at statistics from Halifax, Nova Scotia, what would the number of cases of white people assaulting or killing Black people versus the reverse? I wonder what those numbers might be. Now, I'm sure that Leslie Lowe would respond that, well, these numbers exist because of systemic racism, which is, that's the pooch that could not be screwed, as Tom Wolfe would say it. That, it's universal. It explains everything. Let's just get to the peroration here. I have swum in a sea of racism since birth. I have profited from racism in ways I'll never know. So how in the world could I presume to be immune? It's safest to start with the assumption that I am not. Not acting racist in a systemically, boy, they love that word. Racist society is about more than wishful thinking, more than intent. It's about work. Neutrality, I don't see race. I treat everyone the same. Sounds nice. But in a world we know privileges whiteness, neutrality is just a screen for setting back and letting the same things happen over and over again. I bet I wouldn't know subtle racism if it came up and bit me. I have a suggestion for Leslie Lowe. Quit your job so that a talented young Black person, preferably female, could have it. So you're complaining about white privilege, and you have a pulpit in one of Canada's leading newspapers to do so. So quit your job. Anything less than that is rank hypocrisy. I suppose I'm not alone in just being absolutely fed up with these white quislings who battle for status by telling us just how much they hate their own people and how much they want their own people to suffer. Of course, they never consider that, they would suffer personally because, come the revolution, they'll be grandfathered. They'll be protected. Leslie Lowe is one of the good ones. And a final story from Canada, from the Globe and Mail today. Milestone proposed deal between Wet'suwet'en Nation, Ottawa, BC would recognize hereditary system. The federal and BC governments have reached a proposed arrangement with the Wet'suwet'en Nation to recognize its hereditary governance system, but a resolution to a pipeline dispute remains elusive. Talks between hereditary chiefs and senior government officials focused during the weekend on the future status of the Wet'suwet'en's unceded traditional territory covering 22,000 square kilometers in British Columbia and defining those boundaries. The deal was hailed as a milestone for Indigenous rights and titles, but the details were not released on Sunday as they require approval from Wet'suwet'en members. Coastal GasLink said the company's crews will resume construction on Monday on its $6.6 billion pipeline project after suspending work near Houston, BC last Thursday while the talks were being held. Since February 6th, protests and blockades have spread across the country in support of a group of 8 Wet'suwet'en hereditary house chiefs who oppose Coastal GasLink's plan to build a natural gas pipeline in northern British Columbia. So, Canada is the most progressive country in the world. It likes to think that it is. And so, in pursuit of this progressiveness, Canada apparently has decided to recognize a hereditary oligarchy. Yeah, that's what they've decided to do. That there are elected band chiefs, in the Wet'suwet'en territory, but no, one level of government is not enough. All of the elected councils in the Wet'suwet'en territory have declared for the pipeline, but these elders, the hereditary elders, whose power is, how would I say, difficult to define, ambiguous, nebulous, you could say. So let's bring them in, and they're opposed it for reasons that remain unclear. Let's see. As Wet'suwet'en, we are the land, and the land is ours, Frank Alec, who goes by the Wet'suwet'en hereditary name Woos, said during a news conference. I better be careful about what I say here. I think I'll just wrap it up at this point. But again, hereditary oligarchy. One might think that is alien to a progressive democratic nation, but apparently it isn't. So let's talk about serial killers, because everyone loves serial killers, right? It's a story from the London Independent, The Rise of the Gay Killer, Why Pop Culture is Suddenly Thirsty for Queer Blood. I suppose people might complain that there's too much, gay stuff in my show. In my defense, I will point out that, if I were to speak about what the media speaks about, the same proportion, I don't know, it would be like 50% gay, because the media is determined to gaslight us in this regard, that these people are like 2% of the population, and they lead us around by the nose. And we are given the impression that they're, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of the population. Anyway, the Independent says, as the world becomes more and more of a nightmare with an impending climate catastrophe, yeah, sure, if you say so, and negative news arriving via push notification every other hour, people have turned to an unorthodox escape method, true crime stories. Since the podcast Serial launched our true crime obsession into overdrive in 2014, we've been getting to know convicted murderers from the safety of our homes. Are they really guilty? And what would we have done in their position? Making the perfect true crime show is a fine art, and constantly producing content that's addictive and compelling is a big ask. If we're really honest, the genre was starting to feel slightly predictable. And then come the gays, because they are just going to make serial killing fabulous. Ryan Murphy's The Assassination of Johnny Versace followed gay serial killer Andrew Cunanan as he pursued fame, love, and money, killing anyone who crossed his path. Netflix docuseries Don't Fuck with Cats gave viewers an insight into the twisted mind of Canadian murderer Luca Magnotta. Later this year, The Barking Murders, a 3-part drama starring Sheridan Smith and Stephen Merchant, will explore the crimes of the so-called grinder killer, Stephen Port, who murdered at least 4 men. Now, I saw the series, The Killing of Johnny Versace, and if you haven't seen it, I have a warning for you. It's bogus. It's completely bogus. That Ryan Murphy, the gay fellow, who's the hottest showrunner in Hollywood, was determined to make Cunanan a sympathetic figure. He is not in any way a sympathetic figure. He was an incredibly nasty fellow. But I read the source material. A book came out in 1999 called Vulgar Favors by Maureen Orth, and it's an excellent book. And if you compare the book to the TV series, you will discover that Ryan Murphy and his writers have falsified at every possible opportunity in order to make Cunanan more sympathetic. Also, to give the impression that homosexuals in the United States live in daily terror of oppression. All this stuff about the two men that Cunanan had killed, who were gay lovers. That I got kicked out of the Navy because they found out I was gay. That never happened. This series is constantly, making stuff up in order to highlight the supposed systemic discrimination against homosexuals. The Indie continues tentative queer readings. What an age we live in. Of murderous protagonists in films from decades gone by, such as We Need to Talk About Kevin, Kill Bill, and several Bond villains who have flirted with homoeroticism, the most brazen example being Javier Bardem in Skyfall. No, I think the most brazen example being that movie where there was this sort of Mutt and Jeff, two gay killers in one of the Roger Moore Bond movies. I think that was the most brazen. These have opened the doors to the killers of today who are explicitly and unavoidably gay. Yes, it used to be I'm gay and I'm proud. Now apparently it is I'm gay and I'm proud and I'm a serial killer. The renewed interest in gay killers can be seen as a continuation of pop culture's preoccupation with gay death. It's just now we're doing the killing as well as being killed. Well, that's not true. A lot of male homosexuals have an attraction for what they call rough trade. That is to say, apparently there's a sexual thrill in having sex with a man, typically of a lower class than you, often who's doing it for money, with the threat that he might beat you up or he might kill you. Pasolini, the Italian director, was killed by a rough trade. Mark Blitzstein, the English translator of the Threepenny Opera, was killed by rough trade. There are many, many such examples. Let's see. Killing Eve brings murderous queer women to the forefront, too. Well, I'm glad that the women aren't being left behind. The BBC America drama stars Jodie Corner as a murderous queer assassin. Now, this word queer, until fairly recently, it was considered to be a slur. And it became one of those words, like the N word that one is not allowed to say. But then it got reclaimed. And I don't really know what it means. I have a guess. My guess is that it means gay, only louder and angrier. That's my assumption of what queer means. And they're allowed to say it, but we are not allowed to say it. Sandra Oh portrays an MI5 agent whose flirtations with same-gender desire run parallel to her darkest impulses. It's an undeniably more nuanced depiction than the film Basic Instinct, starring Sharon Stone, which was strongly opposed by alphabet people activists who criticized the film's depiction of gay relationships and the portrayal of a bisexual woman as a murderous psychopath. Well, you see, it seems like Paul Verhoeven was ahead of the curve there. That, let's see, there was the earlier film Cruising, William Friedkin, which was also protested, attempts to shut it down. Okay, so apparently you have a homosexual killer. You're not allowed to show that on the screen because we are a kind and gentle people. That was an old slogan, by the way, of theirs. And then, so we get Sharon Stone, the sexy bisexual killer. And again, there were attempts to shut that movie down because you were not allowed to associate homosexuality with homicide. But now Ooh, homicide is cool. Serial killers are cool. So, the gays have to get into the racket. Yeah, okay. Don't Fuck with Cats actually theorizes that Stone's character in Basic Instinct was one of Canadian serial killers Luca Magnotta's main inspirations, which indicates it wasn't the most responsible depiction of same-sex attraction and murder. Oh, I see. So apparently, as a sensitive young man, or boy, I guess, Luca Magnotta saw Basic Instinct and thought, yes, I am now going to be a gay serial killer because this movie has brainwashed me. The digital revolution has provided infinite ways, from podcasts to Pinterest, of discovering queer heroes. Films starring gay heroines, in particular, from alphabet people rights pioneer Harvey Milk to music icon Elton John and British codebreaker Alan Turing, are now part of Hollywood's filmic furniture. Oh, God. This is the suicidal search for alliteration. But Hugh Lemmy, co-host of Bad Guys, a podcast about evil/complicated gays throughout history, thinks that the stories of gay men who have been considered bad in the past are just as important. These men can teach us how homosexuality and gender variance were once understood, but also how the modern ideas about gay men came to be. Let me suggest that pop culture's sudden attraction to very bad killer gays might be a reaction to protagonists who are increasingly pedestrian. As gay rights have advanced in the past few decades, a very particular type of usually white, gay, male representative of gays has been adopted and integrated by a wider society, he says. For many, this sort of neutered, polite assimilation was never an aim or aspiration, and anti-heroes can reflect that. So now, okay, so you have these people who claim that they're persecuted, and we're just like everyone else. So stop persecuting us. Okay. And then, they become better than us. What, like Tom Hanks in Philadelphia, a saint? They became living saints, and they were portrayed as such during the AIDS epidemic. The Jesus pose on the hospital bed, the sweaty, matted hair, the AZT look. But now, we don't want to be, we're not your grandfather's gays anymore. They're saying, let's see, cruising gets mentioned in this article. Cruising introduced gay men to a mass audience, but it definitely didn't help that it was in the form of the S&M leather scene. In the quest for a queer-killing psychopathic murderer, queers went from near invisibility to explicit hanky code sex club scrutiny. Oh, so what, Friedkin made this up? That a great many homosexuals like to go to places, where they can have anonymous sex with strangers. That a lot of them are involved in S&M. Yeah, okay. But the undeniable problematic hotness of gay killers. When I told some gay men I was writing a play about gay serial killers, lots of them said that's hot. Well, you see, I'm going to explain it for you here. That we live in a decadent society with a decadent culture. And so we praise nihilism. We praise violence. The serial killer cult, it's older than the internet, but it's not that much older than the internet. The internet made it possible for easy access. Back in the old days, I used to run across people who would, they tell me about Ed Gein, right? And, you had to find certain books or certain articles or whatever. And, it was a small cult because it was difficult to become initiated into it. But now it's a very broad cult, and it is celebrated because everything that is disgusting, depraved, destructive is celebrated. And of course, the gayness is just the icing on the cake. I would say that, a show, a story, a series about a gay serial killer, with all the steps taken to make this person as sympathetic as possible, is the most symptomatic, sign of the state of our culture. This is, this is who we are. This is what we aspire to. Oh, let's see. Let's get back to Hugh Lemmy. Gay people secretly wish for their own destruction, whereas straight people secretly envy the unhinged libidinal urge of queer life. Yeah, that's amusing. That's amusing. I really, well, I know for a fact that, you will run into, you'll hear about Wilt Chamberlain, who supposedly slept with 25,000 women. This is clearly a compulsion that, again, average number of sexual partners over a lifetime for heterosexual males, 6. For homosexual males, this is in the United States, 125. 125. That's the average. To most men, juggling women, it's difficult. And again, is there, do you keep score? Right? Oh, apparently I've had, man says, apparently I've only had sex with, with 40 women this year, 40 different women. I got to get that up to 50 by year's end, or I just won't be able to live with myself. No. Again, Gabriel Rotello, who wrote the book Gay Ecology, explained that when these numbers, that when heterosexual men, the numbers were explained to them, they said, no, I don't believe it. Homosexual men aren't having that much sex. They're making it up. They're boasting. And conversely, when homosexual men were told the 6 number, they said, I don't believe it. They're making it up. They're having far more sex than that, but they are just too ashamed to admit it. And see, this is the problem, is that gay culture has resulted in a situation where, they do not understand us. They simply do not understand us. To be fair, we do not understand them because their lives, their thinking is so much different than ours. So let's see. I fact-checked a lot of that book, says Ricky Bullock, and couldn't find any errors. There were maybe a few gray areas, but nothing outright untrue. And it's all plausible and too crazy to think about. He also says that VGA cable is the real MVP. I don't really know what that means. And VGA cable, that's from the past, isn't it? Oh, it's talking about the book Dave McGowan, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Yeah, I've heard of this book, and I have heard that that there is a lot of exaggeration in it. That I think it's one of those books where, somebody dies and then, well, actually, the cause of death wasn't as stated. It was actually murder. Oh, yeah, and the deep state behind it. Ricky Bullock says, I have not seen Cruising, but I was amused by the writer's assertion that the movie didn't help the gay agenda. Of course it helped. It chipped away at the stigma. And I think this is absolutely true. I mentioned this with regard to, reality shows and the daytime talk shows, Jerry and the like. That at first, why are these people on television? This is disgusting. These people should be kept away, kept hidden. And then you just see more and more of it. And eventually you get to the position, who am I to judge? These people are just seeking their bliss like everyone else. Let's see. David the Gnome says, okay, Romney is a bot or a spurg of some sort. Yeah, I don't know about that. He's certainly rootless. Family comes from Michigan. His father was governor. He was raised in Michigan. He relocates to Boston, becomes governor of Massachusetts, and then finally he translates to the Mormon homeworld of Utah, where he's elected senator. Okay, I see a whole bunch of retracted messages. I think YouTube is auto-retracting a lot of your comments, Romney. Yeah, there's about 12 of them. No, there's a lot more than 12. Oh my God, there's dozens of comments being removed. I suppose that will stop me. I suppose that will stop me from having to do this. Oh, let's see. He's talking about a commenter here in the chat, not Mitt Romney, although the point still stands. Get out of there, Kevin. The cable is in the room with you. Okay, and on that bombshell, I'm going to wrap up episode 10 of the KMG Show. I want to thank you all most sincerely for listening. If you would like to support the show, donations are attached to my PayPal account at Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. And I wish you all a good evening, and I will be back on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Bye-bye. Okay, let's see. Before signing off, preview this week. Okay, let's talk about what's coming up on Theater Thursday. Jonathan Glazer's excellent film, his first feature film, Sexy Beast from the year 2000, and the book club, a comedy, a great comedic book, The Diary of a Nobody by George and Whedon Grossmith. And that is truly all, folks. Night, night.